The knock at the door was louder than thunder. Before I could even rise from the bed, 2 officers stepped inside, followed by a woman in black with a clipboard. Jiya was curled against me, her tiny arms wrapped tightly around my neck, her eyes half asleep. One officer's voice was cold. "Sleeping with your child is unsafe. She is coming with us." I clutched Jiya tighter. "No. Please, she only sleeps peacefully beside me. She cries all night if I put her alone. Please don't take her." Jiya whimpered, pressing her face into my chest. "Don't let go." The woman shook her head. "This is against safety standards. Hand her over." They pulled at my daughter, her cries piercing the air. I fell to the floor, begging through tears, "Please, leave my child." That night I learned that in Norway a mother's love could be called a crime. My name is Priya Sharma, and I never imagined my motherhood would be questioned in the land I thought was safest for children. 2 years ago, my husband Arjun and I made the most difficult decision of our lives. We left India with our little daughter, Jiya, to start a new chapter in Norway. At that time she was only 1 year old, tiny, fragile, with big brown eyes that carried the whole world in them. Back home life had been a constant struggle. Arjun worked long hours in a small IT company, barely making enough for rent. I stayed at home with Jiya, sewing clothes for neighbors and helping my mother whenever I could. We dreamed of a better life, a place where Jiya could grow up without the same limitations we had faced. Norway seemed like that dream. Everyone said it was one of the safest countries in the world, with one of the best education systems. We imagined Jiya going to schools that encouraged creativity, walking in parks where children laughed freely, and living in a society where fairness and equality were more than just words. I still remember the day we landed at Oslo airport. The cold air wrapped around us like a new beginning. Arjun held our single suitcase in one hand and Jiya in the other, while I walked beside them with tears of hope in my eyes. He leaned toward me and whispered, "Priya, this is it. We're giving her the future we never had." I nodded, clutching Jiya close, promising myself silently, "Here, nothing bad will ever happen to you." We rented a small but warm apartment in a quiet neighborhood. It wasn't much, just 1 bedroom, a living area and a small kitchen, but to us it was heaven. I decorated Jiya's corner with colorful blankets from home, tiny stuffed animals, and a few storybooks I picked up secondhand. At night we sat together on the floor, eating rice and dal, laughing about our broken Norwegian phrases and the new world we were trying to fit into. But more than anything, our happiness revolved around Jiya. She was our sunshine, our reason for everything. I loved the way she curled her tiny fingers around mine when she fell asleep, the way she giggled when Arjun blew air into her hair, the way her eyes sparkled when I sang her lullabies in Hindi. And like every mother in my culture, I practiced co-sleeping. In India, babies don't sleep alone in dark rooms. They sleep beside their mothers, wrapped in warmth and heartbeat. For me, this wasn't just habit, it was instinct. I believed with all my heart that no bed was safer than my arms. From the day she was born, Jiya never slept alone. She would nestle against my chest, listening to my heartbeat until her breathing softened into dreams. Sometimes she would reach out in her sleep just to touch me and make sure I was there. Always was. When we moved to Norway, I continued our tradition. Every night I would tuck her beside me, whispering lullabies from my childhood. I sang the same song my mother once sang to me. Jiya would close her eyes, smiling, drifting into peaceful sleep. Arjun would often watch us from the corner of the bed, his face soft with love. "She sleeps best with you," he would say. "Maybe that's how it's meant to be." And it was true. If I ever tried to place Jiya in a crib alone, she would cry until her tiny body shook. She was terrified of the dark, terrified of being alone. I didn't know the name for it then, but later I would learn. Nyctophobia. A fear of the dark. At that time I thought it was simple. My daughter needed me and I would never deny her that. Those first months in Norway were filled with joy. We explored parks where Jiya toddled on the grass, falling and laughing as Arjun chased her. We walked by lakes that shimmered under the cold sun, teaching her to say new words. Pani for water, sky in English, himmel in Norwegian. We joined a small Indian community, attending festivals where Jiya danced in her tiny lehenga while other mothers clapped with joy. I felt proud. Proud that even in a foreign land I could give my daughter the same love, the same closeness, the same traditions that I had been given. But then came the whispers. Other immigrant mothers warned me. "Be careful, Priya. one said in hushed tones during a Diwali gathering. Here they don't understand our ways. If they find out your child sleeps with you, they might say it's unsafe. I laughed nervously. How can love be unsafe? She is happiest beside me. The woman shook her head, her eyes filled with sorrow. In Norway, the system sees things differently. Barnevernet, they can take your child. Her words lingered, but I refused to believe them. I told myself that won't happen to us. We're good parents. Jiya is loved and thriving. No one can take her away for love. I clung to that belief. Every night when I held Jiya in my arms, listening to her soft breathing, I felt secure in the knowledge that love was universal. That no culture, no country, no system could argue with the pure bond between a mother and her child. I was wrong. The first time Velferd came to our door, I thought it was routine. Two officers, polite but distant, asked questions, looked around the apartment, scribbled in their notepads. They saw Jiya curled up against me on the bed. I explained gently, smiling, she doesn't sleep alone. She's afraid of the dark. With me she feels safe. They exchanged a glance. One of them wrote something down quickly. The other said in clipped English, "This is not safe. In Norway, children sleep separately. It is healthier, safer." I tried to explain, my voice soft but firm. In my culture, this is love. She cannot sleep alone. She is happy, healthy, strong. Please understand. But their faces remained blank, professional, cold. When they left, a chill remained in the room. I hugged Jiya tightly, whispering into her hair, "Don't worry, my love. Mama is here. No one will take you away." But deep down, fear had begun to creep into my heart. I thought of all the warnings, all the stories whispered among immigrant mothers. Stories I had dismissed as exaggerations. Now they felt like shadows waiting at my door. I looked at Jiya as she slept peacefully in my arms, her small chest rising and falling, her tiny fingers clutching my hand. She was my world, my reason for everything. And I made myself a promise. I will never let you sleep alone in the dark. I will never let you cry yourself to sleep. I will protect you even if the world calls it wrong. But I didn't know then that my promise would soon be tested in the cruelest way. That the very thing that kept her safe in my eyes would be twisted into risk by others. And that the world I trusted to protect her would be the one to break her. After that first visit, I tried to calm myself. Arjun told me not to worry. It was just a check, he said. They have to do it for everyone. They'll see that Jiya is happy and healthy. They'll leave us alone. I wanted to believe him. I clung to his words like a lifeline. But every time Jiya curled against me at night, I remembered the cold eyes of the officers, the way they wrote down notes without hearing my heart. A week later, another letter arrived. Velferd wanted a follow-up visit. My hands shook as I held the paper. Arjun took it from me, frowning. "We'll let them in. We'll answer everything honestly. We have nothing to hide." The second visit was worse than the first. This time 3 officers came. A woman with a sharp ponytail led them, her tone firm and her eyes unwavering. She asked endless questions. How many hours Jiya slept, what she ate, where she played, how often Arjun worked. When she asked, "Where does the child sleep?" I froze. I wanted to lie, but my voice refused. "She sleeps with me. She's afraid of the dark. She cries if I leave her alone." The woman scribbled something, then looked at me with disapproval. "Co-sleeping is unsafe. She could suffocate. She must learn to sleep independently." I tried to explain, my words tumbling in desperation. "No, you don't understand. In our culture it is normal. Children need their mothers. Jiya is not safe when she's alone in the dark. She panics. With me she feels secure. Please, this is love." But her face remained unmoved, her pen scratching against paper. When they left, the silence in the apartment was suffocating. Arjun tried to reassure me, but I could see fear flickering in his eyes too. Then one morning everything collapsed. It was raining outside when the knock came again. This time it wasn't a visit. It was an order. The ponytail woman returned, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. Her words were sharp, final. "We are placing Jiya in temporary foster care." My world froze. No, you can't. Please. She is only 2. She needs me. She cannot sleep alone. Jiya clung to my arm, crying, "Mama, Mama, and ho." My heart shattered into pieces. Arjun stepped forward, his voice breaking with anger. "You cannot do this. She's our daughter. We've done nothing wrong." The officer's reply was cold. This is for her safety. They pulled Jiya from my arms as I screamed, please don't take my child. Please, she only sleeps with me. She is afraid of the dark. Her cries echoed down the hallway as they carried her away. My body collapsed onto the floor, trembling as if my soul had been ripped out. That night our home was emptier than death itself. Her toys lay scattered on the floor. Her blanket still smelled of her. I pressed it against my face, sobbing until my body went numb. Days passed in a blur. We were told she had been placed in foster care. The words made me sick. Foster care. Strangers raising my daughter, strangers tucking her into bed, strangers who didn't know her fears. When we were finally given limited updates, my worst nightmare began to unfold. The foster parents had placed her in a separate room, the lights off at night. They didn't know, how could they, that my little Jiya was terrified of the dark. Since she was a baby, she would scream if I left her alone in a dark room. She had nyctophobia, a fear so strong it would shake her tiny body with terror. Without me beside her, without the comfort of my arms, her phobia turned into trauma. They told us she cried for hours every night, kicking, screaming, clawing at the door. She refused to eat. She refused to sleep. Her little voice grew hoarse from calling for me. Within weeks, she was admitted to a hospital. The report said, emotional and psychological distress. But those were just words. The truth was harsher. My baby was breaking without me. When I heard this, I felt my knees give way. Arjun caught me before I hit the ground. I sobbed into his chest. They said I was unsafe. But look what they've done to her. They called me danger, but they are the danger. Arjun's eyes filled with fire. If they think they can hide this, they are wrong. We will not stay silent. That night we made a decision. We reached out to other immigrant families, to community leaders, to human rights groups. I shared our story online, trembling as I typed. They took my daughter for co-sleeping. Now she is in a hospital because she was forced to sleep alone in the dark. This is not protection. This is cruelty. The response was overwhelming. Parents wrote from across Norway, sharing their own stories of fear and loss. Some whispered that their children had been taken too. Others cried with us, saying, "Stay strong. Keep fighting." Our story spread to Indian communities abroad. News outlets began calling. Headlines appeared, "Indian girl suffers trauma in Norwegian foster care." The embassy reached out, promising support. For the first time since Jiya was taken, I felt a flicker of hope. We organized a community gathering. Dozens of families stood with us, holding signs in both English and Norwegian. Family is not a crime. No bed is safer than a mother's arms. Stop cultural discrimination. Standing in that crowd, I felt less alone. I held up a photo of Jiya, her wide eyes filled with innocence, and I shouted through my tears. They took her because she slept beside me. But look what happened when she slept alone. My daughter is in the hospital. This is their protection. This is their care. The crowd roared in agreement. Reporters took notes. Cameras flashed. The story was out. The world was watching. But even as the protests grew, my nights remained empty. Every time I lay down in bed, my arms reached for her. Every time the lights went out, I thought of her screaming in a dark room, begging for me. I whispered into the silence, "Hold on, Jiya. Mama is fighting. Mama will bring you home." Arjun worked day and night, speaking with lawyers, pushing the embassy, contacting anyone who would listen. I poured my soul into interviews, into speeches, into every tear I shed before the world. And slowly the cracks began to show in the system. Officials who once ignored us were now under pressure. Journalists demanded answers. Human rights groups questioned the welfare agency. We had turned our grief into a weapon. And for the first time I felt that maybe, just maybe, our daughter would be returned. But as I stood in front of crowds shouting for justice, I still carried the same haunting question. How could love ever be called unsafe? The day I saw Jiya in the hospital will haunt me forever. She was lying on a small white bed, her tiny body wrapped in a blanket, her eyes hollow and swollen from nights of crying. The moment she saw me, she reached out with trembling arms, sobbing, "Mama, don't leave me. Please don't leave me again." I broke down. I held her as tightly as I could, kissing her forehead, whispering, "I'm here, Jiya. Mama is here. I'll never let go." But inside I was burning with rage. This was the system that said I was unsafe. This was the system that tore her away in the name of protection. And now my daughter was traumatized, broken, and hospitalized because of them. Arjun stood beside me, his fists clenched. His voice shook with fury as he told the officers standing by the door, "You did this. You called our love dangerous. And look at her now. Is this your idea of safety?" The officers looked away, avoiding his eyes. They had no answer. That night Arjun and I made a vow. We would not stop until Jiya was home for good. We began reaching out to every contact we had. The Indian embassy arranged a meeting with Norwegian officials, pressing for answers. Community leaders organized another protest, larger than before. This time hundreds of people came. Immigrants, Norwegians, families who had heard our story and couldn't stay silent. The signs were louder, bolder. "This is not protection, it's cruelty. Every child deserves their mother's love. Stop tearing families apart." Reporters crowded around us, microphones thrust toward my face. I took a deep breath and spoke, my voice trembling but strong. My daughter was taken from me because she slept in my arms. They said she was unsafe with me. But when they put her alone in a dark room, she ended up in a hospital. This is not protection. This is trauma. No bed is safer than a mother's arms. The crowd erupted in applause. Tears streamed down my face as I held up a photo of Jiya smiling in happier days. We came here for a better future, but all we've faced is pain. If this can happen to us, it can happen to anyone. The cameras captured everything. The newspapers the next day carried our story. Child traumatized in foster care after being taken for co-sleeping. Social media exploded with outrage. The hashtag Justice for Jiya spread quickly, not just in Norway but across Europe and India. For the first time I felt the system shake. Government officials began receiving questions they could no longer ignore. Human rights organizations released statements demanding accountability. Even some Norwegian citizens, parents themselves, expressed their support. "Every child deserves comfort and love," one wrote online. "How can sleeping next to your mother be a crime?" But Velferd resisted. They insisted they had followed protocol, that their actions were in the best interest of the child. Their words were cold, robotic, and meaningless to me. So we pressed on. Arjun became relentless. He worked during the day and spent nights writing letters, making calls, speaking with journalists. His eyes grew heavy with exhaustion, but his voice never wavered. "I will not stop," he told me one night, gripping my hand. "They will not break us. We will bring her back." And I found strength in my daughter's face. Every time I visited her in the hospital, every time she whispered, "Mama, please don't let them take me again," I swore I would fight until my last breath. One moment stands out clearly in my memory. We held a community gathering in a small hall. Families filled the room, mothers holding their children tightly, fathers standing tall with determination. We lit candles for Jiya, for every child taken. The room glowed with soft light, filled with both sorrow and hope. When it was my turn to speak, I walked to the front, my knees shaking. I looked around at the faces that carried the same fear, the same pain, the same desperate love. "My daughter is only 2 years old," I began. "She has never known a night without me. She sleeps best when she feels my heartbeat. But they said my love was unsafe. They tore her from me, placed her in a dark room and called it protection. She screamed until her body broke. Now she is in a hospital, suffering because of their care." I held up a small stuffed elephant, Jiya's favorite toy. My voice cracked. "This little toy still smells like her. Every night I hold it because I can't hold her. But I promise you I will not give up. I will bring her home. Not just for her, but for every child who deserves their mother's love." The hall filled with sobs and applause. People chanted Jiya's name. Cameras captured every moment. The story spread even further, carried by human voices louder than any report. As the pressure grew, cracks began to show. The embassy increased its involvement, pushing Norwegian authorities to re-examine the case. International media picked up the story, comparing it to past controversies with Barnevernet. Activists began calling it a violation of human rights. And slowly, finally, the walls began to crumble. We received word that the court would reopen our case. For the first time since that terrible day they took her, I felt hope pulse through my veins. But hope was fragile. The night before the hearing I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment. The knock on the door. Jiya's cries. The empty crib. The hospital bed. Arjun turned toward me, his voice low. Tomorrow everything changes. I nodded, my heart pounding. Tomorrow we bring her home. The courtroom was filled with tension. The Velferd officers sat on one side, their files stacked neatly, their faces cold. We sat on the other, clutching each other's hands, waiting for our turn to speak. The lawyer spoke first. The officers repeated their claims. Co-sleeping was unsafe, children must sleep alone, parents must follow the rules. Their words were clinical, stripped of love, stripped of humanity. Then our lawyer stood. He presented the hospital reports. Proof that Jiya had suffered trauma from forced separation. Doctors testified that her nyctophobia had worsened in foster care, that the system's safety measures had broken her emotionally. Finally, it was my turn. I rose, my body trembling but my voice steady. They said I was dangerous because I held my daughter when she slept. I began. But when they forced her to sleep alone, she ended up in a hospital. Tell me, who kept her safe? Who loved her? Who protected her? I turned toward the judge, tears streaming down my face. A mother's arms are not danger. They are home. They are safety. They are love. Please, give me back my daughter. The courtroom fell silent. That moment, suspended in the air, was the heaviest of my life. The judge's decision would come soon. And as I sat down, clutching Arjun's hand, I whispered to myself, hold on, Jiya. Mama is almost there. The courtroom felt colder than winter itself. I sat beside Arjun, my hands trembling in his, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear the words being spoken. Across the room, the Velferd officers sat with their files stacked neatly, their expressions blank, as if our child was nothing more than paperwork. The judge entered and silence swept over the room. I held my breath. This was it. This was the moment everything depended on. The proceedings began. The officers spoke first, their arguments the same as always. Co-sleeping is unsafe, independent sleeping is healthier, the parents are resistant to Norwegian standards. Their voices were flat, stripped of any warmth. To them, love was irrelevant. Only rules mattered. Then our lawyer rose. He presented the hospital reports. He read out the doctor's testimony describing Jiya's severe psychological distress, her nyctophobia, her panic attacks. He showed that the trauma she suffered came not from our arms but from being forced away from them. And then came the expert witness, a child psychologist from India, flown in with support from the embassy. She spoke clearly, firmly. In many cultures, co-sleeping is not neglect, it is care. Studies show it strengthens emotional bonds, reduces anxiety, and gives children a sense of security. Jiya's trauma is proof of this. She was safe with her mother. It was only when she was separated and forced to sleep alone in the dark that she broke. What happened to her was not protection, it was harm. The courtroom murmured. The judge leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he listened. Finally, it was my turn. I rose to my feet, my knees shaking, my voice raw with months of pain. They said I endangered my daughter because I let her sleep in my arms. But when they tore her from me, she ended up in a hospital. Tell me, who kept her safe? Was it me who sang her to sleep every night, who comforted her when she cried? Or was it the strangers who put her in a dark room alone, with no one to hold her when she was afraid? My voice cracked, tears streaming down my face. A mother's arms are not danger. They are the safest place a child can ever be. Please, give me back my daughter. The room fell silent. For a moment I thought I heard Jiya's voice in my head calling Mama. The judge cleared his throat. He adjusted his glasses, looked at his papers, then at me. His words came slowly, each one striking like a bell. This court finds no evidence of neglect. On the contrary, it finds that the child, Jiya Sharma, suffered harm in foster care due to the separation from her parents. Cultural practices must be respected when they are not harmful. Co-sleeping in this case was a practice of comfort, not of danger. Therefore, custody is to be returned to the parents immediately. For a moment I couldn't breathe. Did I hear correctly? My body froze, then shook violently as the words sank in. Arjun grabbed my hand, his eyes filling with tears. Priya, we did it. She's coming home. I collapsed into his arms, sobbing uncontrollably. Relief, joy, and grief all mixed together until I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. And then Jiya entered. The foster caretaker walked her in, but this time she didn't hesitate. She saw me and broke into a run, her tiny arms outstretched. Mama. Mama. I fell to my knees, catching her in my arms, holding her as tightly as I could. She clung to me like she would never let go again, her face buried in my neck. I kissed her hair, her cheeks, her little hands, whispering over and over, "I'm here, Jiya. Mama's here. I'll never let anyone take you again." Arjun wrapped his arms around both of us, his tears falling freely. For the first time in months we were whole again. The courtroom blurred around us. The judge, the officers, the lawyers. None of it mattered. All that mattered was that my daughter was back in my arms, where she always belonged. The days that followed felt like waking from a nightmare. We brought Jiya home, back to the small apartment that had always been hers. Her toys were still scattered where she had left them. Her favorite blanket still lay on the bed. When she saw her room again, she smiled weakly, clutching her stuffed elephant, whispering, "Home." For weeks she refused to leave my side. At night she clung to me, terrified that if she closed her eyes, I would be gone again. She would cry out, "Mama, don't leave me," even when I was lying right beside her. It broke my heart to see the scars they had left on her little soul. But slowly, with time, with love, with lullabies whispered in the dark, her laughter began to return. And every time she smiled, every time she slept peacefully in my arms, I knew the truth. They could never take this love away from us again. But even as joy returned to our home, I could not forget the others. In the waiting rooms of Velferd, I had seen other mothers, faces pale with fear, eyes hollow with grief. Some never got their children back. Some were still fighting. Some had given up hope. We were one of the lucky ones. But luck should not decide whether a child sleeps in her mother's arms or cries alone in a strange bed. So we continued to speak out. We joined with other families, sharing our story, raising our voices. We told the world, cultural differences are not crimes. Love is not neglect. And slowly more people began to listen. Now when I hold Jiya at night, I think about everything we endured. The cold rooms, the blank reports, the cruel words. The nights I cried into her empty blanket. The protests, the speeches, the desperate prayers. And I think about the moment she ran back into my arms, her little voice breaking as she cried, "Mama." That moment will live inside me forever. They said no bed was safe, I whisper to her as she sleeps. But they were wrong. No bed is safer than my arms. And no system, no judgment, no law will ever convince me otherwise. I kiss her forehead, breathing in the soft scent of her hair, and I know with absolute certainty, loved one, if this story touched your heart, let your like show that no mother's love should ever be called unsafe. Subscribe to stand with families who refuse to be silenced, and share this video so the world sees the truth. Together we can remind everyone, no bed is safer than a mother's arms.